The telegram arrived at dawn, and Willa Foster's hands trembled so violently she could barely read the words announcing her arranged marriage to a rancher in New Mexico territory. A man she'd never met, scheduled for 3 weeks from today. It was April 1878, and Willa stood in the cramped Boston boarding house room she shared with 2 other women, staring at the yellow paper as if it might transform into something less terrifying. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving debts that swallowed everything. Her mother had passed when Willa was 12. At 22 years old, she had no family, no money, and apparently no choice. The arrangement had been made by her late father's business associate, a man named Montgomery Prescott, who claimed he was doing her a kindness by finding her a husband out west. The train journey took 5 days, each mile carrying her farther from everything familiar. Willa pressed her face against the window, watching the landscape transform from green hills to endless prairie, then to the stark beauty of high desert. She'd packed everything she owned into 2 worn carpet bags, 3 dresses, undergarments, her mother's silver hairbrush, and a book of poetry that was falling apart at the seams. When the train finally pulled into Lordsburg, New Mexico territory, the late afternoon sun blazed overhead with an intensity that made her Eastern clothes feel suffocating. Willa stepped onto the platform, dust coating her black traveling dress within seconds. She scanned the small crowd for someone who might be looking for a bride, her stomach churning with anxiety. Instead, she saw a tall man leaning against a post, watching her with an expression that seemed more curious than expectant. He wore dusty work clothes, a worn hat pushed back on his head revealing dark hair, and had the weathered look of someone who spent his days under the relentless sun. Their eyes met for just a moment before Willa forced herself to look away, searching for the man she was supposed to marry. "Miss Foster." A nasal voice cut through the noise of the station. Willa turned to find a short, portly man with a sweaty face and calculating eyes. He was at least 60 years old, with tobacco-stained teeth visible through his attempted smile. Everything in Willa's body recoiled. "I'm Montgomery Prescott," he said, reaching for her bags without invitation. "Your intended, Mr. Dalton, sends his regrets. Business kept him at the ranch. But don't you worry, we'll have you settled in town until the wedding. Just 3 days now, 3 days. The telegram had said 3 weeks. Willa felt the platform tilt beneath her feet. "I was told 3 weeks," she managed to say. Prescott waved a dismissive hand. "Change of plans. Mr. Dalton is an important man with important business. The wedding is set for Sunday morning, and that's that." Willa's vision blurred at the edges. This couldn't be happening. 3 days wasn't enough time to prepare, to adjust, to breathe. She hadn't even met the man she was supposed to marry, and now she had mere days before binding herself to a stranger for life. "Now come along," Prescott said impatiently. "I've arranged for you to stay at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen runs a respectable place." As Prescott grabbed her arm to guide her away, Willa caught another glimpse of the tall man by the post. He was frowning now, his attention fixed on Prescott's grip on her arm. Something in his expression made her think he didn't approve of what he was seeing. The boarding house was clean but sparse, a 2-story adobe building on the edge of Lordsburg's Main Street. Mrs. Chen was a Chinese woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficient movements. She showed Willa to a small room with a single window overlooking the dusty street. "You need anything, you ask," Mrs. Chen said in accented but clear English. "I bring water for washing. Supper at 6. When she was alone, Willa sank onto the narrow bed and finally let herself cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but silent tears that tracked through the dust on her face. She had known this arrangement wouldn't be a love match, had accepted that her life was about survival now rather than happiness. But somehow the reality was so much worse than her imagination had prepared her for. That evening at supper, Willa sat at the communal table with 4 other boarders, 2 minors, an elderly widow, and a young woman who introduced herself as Sarah, a seamstress. The food was simple but good, and Mrs. Chen kept the plates full. "You're the mail-order bride," Sarah said, not unkindly. It wasn't a question. Willa nodded, unable to find her voice. Sarah exchanged a glance with Mrs. Chen. "Mr. Dalton," Sarah said carefully. "He's very wealthy, owns the biggest ranch in the county, runs cattle, and has mining interests too." The unspoken words hung in the air. Wealth wasn't the same as goodness, and everyone at the table seemed to know something they weren't saying. "Have you met him?" Willa asked quietly. "Few times in town," Sarah said. Well, he's a businessman first and foremost, if you understand my meaning." Willa understood. She was entering into a transaction, not a marriage in any meaningful sense. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Willa stood at her window, watching the quiet street below. A few men walked between saloons, their voices carrying in the still air. Horses stood tied at various posts, patient in the way of working animals. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The next day, Prescott arrived at noon to take her shopping for a wedding dress. Willa had hoped to meet her intended, but apparently Mr. Dalton was still occupied with business. The dress shop was cramped and warm, run by a Mexican woman named Señora Martinez, who spoke little English but communicated perfectly through gestures and pins held between her teeth. The only suitable dress in Willa's size was cream-colored with yellowed lace, clearly altered from something else. It would do. Everything would have to do because she had no other options. As Prescott paid for the dress, Willa noticed a man through the shop window. The same tall man from the train station, now leading a horse down the street. He moved with an easy confidence, tipping his hat to ladies he passed, stopping to help an older man carry supplies. There was something about him that suggested both strength and gentleness, an unusual combination in her limited experience. "That's Jonah Baker," Señora Martinez said, following Willa's gaze. Her English was better than she'd let on. "Good man. Works the cattle ranches, does breaking horses too. Honest worker." "I see," Willa said, though she didn't understand why she was even curious. Prescott bustled her out of the shop and back to the boarding house, talking the entire way about what a fortunate woman she was to be marrying a man of Mr. Dalton's stature. Willa stopped listening, her mind cycling through increasingly desperate scenarios. Could she run? Where would she go? She had perhaps $3 to her name, no skills beyond basic household work, and no one to turn to for help. By Saturday evening, Willa had worked herself into such a state of anxiety that she could barely eat supper. Tomorrow morning, she would marry a man she'd never met, bind herself legally and spiritually to a complete stranger, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. After the meal, she walked outside into the cooler evening air, needing to breathe, needing to think. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she could have seen them through her panic. "You all right, miss?" Willa jumped, turning to find Jonah Baker standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. Up close, she could see his face more clearly. Weathered skin, lines around his eyes from squinting in the sun, a strong jaw, and gray-blue eyes that looked genuinely concerned. "I'm fine," Willa said automatically, then laughed bitterly because it was such an obvious lie. Jonah was quiet for a moment, studying her. "You're the woman who's supposed to marry Dalton tomorrow." It wasn't a question, but Willa nodded anyway. "Have you met him yet?" Jonah asked. "No." Something flickered across Jonah's face, an emotion Willa couldn't quite identify. Anger, maybe, or disapproval. "That doesn't sit right," he said quietly. "Man should meet the woman he's marrying before the wedding day." "I don't have a choice," Willa said, and hated how small her voice sounded. Jonah looked at her for a long moment, and Willa felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Not judged, not assessed for her usefulness, but actually seen as a person with feelings and fears. "There's always a choice," Jonah said finally. "Might not be an easy one, but it's there." Before Willa could respond, he settled his hat back on his head and walked away, leaving her standing in the gathering darkness with her heart pounding inexplicably hard. That night was endless. Willa lay awake, watching shadows move across her ceiling, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her. Jonah's words kept echoing in her mind. There's always a choice. But what choice did she really have? If she refused to marry Dalton, Prescott would likely demand reimbursement for her train ticket and the wedding expenses. She'd be homeless in a town where she knew no one, with no means of supporting herself. When dawn finally broke, Willa felt hollow with exhaustion. Mrs. Chen brought water and helped her wash and dress in the cream-colored wedding gown. Sarah stopped by with a small bouquet of wildflowers, her eyes sympathetic. "You're very brave," Sarah whispered as she adjusted Willa's veil. "Brave." Willa wanted to laugh. She wasn't brave. She was terrified and trapped, which was entirely different. The wedding was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the small Catholic church on the edge of town. Prescott arrived at 9:30 to escort her, chattering nervously about the weather and the wedding breakfast that had been arranged. Willa barely heard him. Her hands had started shaking, a fine tremor that spread up her arms and into her chest until she felt like her whole body was vibrating with fear. They walked the 3 blocks to the church, Prescott's hand firmly on her elbow. A few townspeople had gathered despite the early hour, curious to see the mail-order bride. Their faces blurred together as Willa climbed the church steps, her legs moving mechanically, because stopping would mean collapsing. Inside, the church was cool and dim, lit by candles. A priest stood at the altar, his expression neutral, and next to him stood a man who must be Mr. Dalton. He was probably 50 years old, maybe older, with a prominent belly and thinning gray hair. His suit was expensive but strained across his middle. His eyes, when they found Willa, were cold and assessing, looking her up and down like he was inspecting livestock. She saw him nod slightly, apparently satisfied with what he'd purchased. Willa's shaking intensified. Her bouquet trembled so violently that petals fell to the floor. Her breath came in short, inadequate gasps. The church seemed to tilt and spin around her. "Steady now," Prescott hissed in her ear, practically dragging her forward, but Willa couldn't move. Her feet had rooted to the floor 3 steps into the church. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to run, to get away, that this was wrong, so terribly wrong. "Miss Foster, we don't have all day," Dalton said irritably from the altar. The sound of his voice, impatient and entitled, made something crack inside Willa. She took a stumbling step backward, away from Prescott's grip, away from the altar, away from the man she was supposed to marry. Her whole body was shaking so hard now that she could barely stand. "I can't," she whispered. Then louder, "I can't do this." "Don't be ridiculous," Prescott snapped, reaching for her again. "You'll do what you agreed to do." "I didn't agree to anything," Willa said, her voice rising toward hysteria. "My father's associate arranged this without consulting me. I've never met this man. I can't marry him. I can't." Dalton's face darkened with anger. "Now you listen here, girl. I paid good money to bring you out here." "I'll pay you back," Willa said desperately, knowing it was impossible. "Somehow I'll pay every cent back, but I can't marry you. I'm sorry, but I can't." She turned and ran, her ridiculous wedding dress tangling around her legs, her veil flying behind her. She burst out of the church into the brilliant morning sunlight, half blinded and completely panicked. Behind her, she could hear Dalton shouting and Prescott cursing. Willa ran down the church steps and straight into someone's chest, nearly knocking them both over. Strong hands steadied her shoulders, and she looked up through tears to find Jonah Baker staring down at her with surprise and concern. "Please," Willa gasped. "Please help me. I don't know what to do. I don't have anywhere to go, but I can't marry that man. Please." Jonah's expression shifted, his jaw tightening with decision. He glanced past her to the church, where Dalton and Prescott had appeared in the doorway, both red-faced with fury. "Can you ride a horse?" Jonah asked quickly. "What? I don't know. Maybe. It's been years since I tried." "Good enough." Jonah took her hand and pulled her toward two horses tied nearby. "Come on." "What are you doing?" Willa asked, but she followed because she had no other option. "Helping you," Jonah said simply. He lifted her onto one of the horses, then swung onto the other with practiced ease. "Hold on tight and follow my lead." "Baker," Dalton's voice bellowed across the churchyard, "you bring her back right now." But Jonah was already kicking his horse into motion, and Willa's horse followed instinctively. She grabbed the saddle horn with both hands, her wedding dress billowing around her, the veil finally tearing free and floating away on the wind. They galloped out of Lordsburg heading east, dust rising in clouds behind them. Willa clung to the horse, terrified of falling but more terrified of being caught. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The shaking that had started before the wedding had become a full-body tremor. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Jonah slowed his horse to a walk and gestured for Willa to do the same. They were surrounded by desert scrubland now, Lordsburg just visible in the distance behind them. Jonah guided them off the main path toward a cluster of rocks that offered some shade. When they stopped, Willa practically fell from the horse, her legs shaking too hard to support her properly. She sank to the ground in a heap of cream-colored fabric, gasping for breath. Jonah dismounted more gracefully and crouched beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence as something solid and real. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Just breathe. You're safe now. Nobody's going to make you do anything you don't want to do." Willa tried to follow his instruction, pulling air into her lungs in great, shuddering gasps. Gradually, her breathing slowed. The shaking continued, but less violently. "I'm sorry," she finally managed to say. "I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything. You'll probably get in trouble for helping me, and I don't even know you, and I have no right to drag you into my problems." "Hey," Jonah said gently. "Look at me." Willa lifted her eyes to meet his. His expression was kind, patient, and utterly calm in a way that made her feel slightly less like she was falling apart. "You didn't ruin anything," Jonah said. "You made a choice, a brave one, and I chose to help because what was happening back there wasn't right. A woman shouldn't be forced into a marriage, and a man sure as hell shouldn't marry someone he hasn't even bothered to meet before the wedding day." "But what do I do now?" Willa asked, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I have no money, nowhere to go. Dalton will probably demand I repay him for the train ticket and everything else. I'll end up in debtor's prison or worse." Jonah was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We'll figure it out," he said finally. "One step at a time. First thing, we need to get you out of that dress and into something practical. Can't ride far in a wedding gown." Despite everything, Willa felt a weak laugh bubble up. "I don't exactly have spare clothes with me." "No, but I've got extra work clothes in my saddlebag. They'll be too big, but better than what you're wearing. And then we need to decide where to take you." Jonah stood and walked to his horse, Digging through the leather bag behind the saddle, Willa watched him, trying to understand why this stranger was helping her. He could have easily walked past the church that morning, could have ignored her desperate plea, could have told her it wasn't his problem. Instead, he'd essentially kidnapped her from her own wedding, which would certainly cause him trouble with Dalton, who apparently was an important man in the territory. "Why are you helping me?" Willa asked. "You don't even know me." Jonah pulled out a spare shirt and trousers, then turned to face her. "My mother was in a situation like yours once," he said quietly. "Before she married my father, I mean. Her family tried to force her into a marriage with a cruel man. She ran, and a stranger helped her get away. She always said that kindness saved her life. Figured I could do the same when I saw someone who needed help." He handed her the clothes and turned his back politely. "There's a bit of privacy behind those rocks. Get changed, and we'll talk about what to do next." Willa stumbled behind the rocks on shaking legs. Removing the wedding dress was harder than putting it on had been, her trembling fingers fumbling with buttons and ties. When she finally pulled on Jonah's spare clothes, the fabric smelled like soap and sun-dried cotton. The shirt hung to her knees, and the trousers had to be rolled up several times, but they were infinitely more practical than the dress. When she emerged, Jonah had spread a blanket in the shade and was offering her a canteen of water. Willa drank gratefully, suddenly aware of how thirsty she was. "Better?" Jonah asked. "A little," Willa admitted. The shaking had finally subsided to occasional tremors. "I still don't know what to do." Jonah settled onto the blanket, gesturing for her to sit as well. "Tell me about yourself. What brought you out here in the first place?" So Willa told him. About her father's death and the debts, about having no family left, about Prescott's letter offering an arranged marriage as her only option. She told him about the train journey and the shock of finding out the wedding had been moved up. She talked until her voice was hoarse and Jonah listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. "You've had a rough time of it," he said when she finished. "I'm sorry for that. No one should have to go through what you've been through." "But it doesn't change my situation," Willa said. "I'm still broke and homeless and probably about to be arrested for breach of contract or something." "Maybe not," Jonah said slowly. "I've been thinking. I work at the Running Creek Ranch about 30 miles north of here. Owner's name is Frank Miller. Good man, fair employer. His wife, Martha, has been looking for help around the house. They've got 5 children and another on the way. She's been asking Frank to hire someone for months now. I could take you there, see if she'd be willing to give you work." Hope flickered in Willa's chest, fragile and tentative. "You think they'd hire me, even knowing what happened?" "I think Martha would hire you especially knowing what happened," Jonah said. "She's got strong feelings about women being treated fairly. And once you've earned some money, you could pay Dalton back if you wanted to, though honestly I don't think he has any legal standing. You never signed a marriage contract." "But won't Dalton come after me, after us?" "He might try," Jonah acknowledged. "But Running Creek is outside his usual territory, and Frank Miller doesn't take kindly to bullies. We'll deal with that if it happens." He paused, then added softly, "We'll take this one day at a time. Don't have to solve everything right now. One day at a time." The words felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Willa didn't have to figure out her entire future in this moment. She just had to get through today and then tomorrow and the day after that. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier than it had been all morning. "Okay, let's try." Jonah smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely warm. "Good. We'll rest here for a bit, let the horses cool down, then head north. It'll take most of the day to get there, but we'll make it by nightfall." They sat in the shade of the rocks, sharing food from Jonah's saddlebags. Dried meat, hard biscuits, and an apple that he cut in half with a pocket knife. It was the simplest meal Willa had eaten in days, and somehow it tasted better than anything from the boarding house. As the sun climbed higher, they talked. Jonah told her about growing up in Texas, learning to work cattle and break horses from his father. He'd moved to New Mexico territory 3 years ago, looking for better opportunities. He loved the work despite its hardships, loved the wide open spaces and the challenge of taming wild horses. "What about you?" he asked. "What did you do back in Boston?" "Nothing very interesting," Willa admitted. "I worked in a textile factory for a while, then as a companion to an elderly woman until she passed. I liked to read when I could afford books. My mother taught me to sew and cook before she died." She paused, then added quietly, "I always wanted to travel to see places beyond the city, though I didn't imagine it happening quite like this." "Life has a way of surprising us," Jonah said. "Not always in good ways, but sometimes those surprises lead to something better than we could have planned." By early afternoon, they were riding again. Jonah set a steady pace, mindful of Willa's inexperience with horses. He pointed out landmarks as they rode: a distinctive rock formation, a dry creek bed that flooded during monsoon season, the distant mountains marking the horizon. The landscape was so different from anything Willa had known. Endless stretches of scrubland dotted with cacti and hardy bushes, the sky impossibly blue and vast overhead. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. She understood why someone could love this land, even as it intimidated her. They stopped twice more to rest the horses and stretch their legs. Each time, Jonah checked behind them for signs of pursuit, but the trail remained empty. "Do you think Dalton will actually come after me?" Willa asked during their second stop. "Hard to say," Jonah replied. "Men like him don't take kindly to being embarrassed, and you embarrassed him pretty thoroughly in front of the whole town. But he's also a businessman. Might decide you're more trouble than you're worth." "I hope you're right." "Me too," Jonah said, and something in his tone made Willa look at him more closely. "You'll be in trouble too, won't you? For helping me?" Jonah shrugged. "Maybe. I don't do much business with Dalton directly, so he can't hurt me there, and Frank Miller won't fire me for doing what's right. Worst case, I might have to avoid Lordsburg for a while, but that's no great loss." "Still," Willa said softly, "thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there." "You would have figured something out," Jonah said. "You're stronger than you think." Running out of that church took guts. Willa wasn't sure about that. Running had felt less like courage and more like sheer panic, but she appreciated his faith in her. The sun was sinking toward the western horizon when they finally spotted the Running Creek Ranch in the distance. It was larger than Willa had expected. A sprawling main house, several outbuildings, extensive corrals, and what looked like a bunkhouse for workers. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and she could see several people moving around the property. As they rode closer, a man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was in his 40s, barrel-chested and weather-worn, with a full beard going gray. "Jonah," the man called out, "wasn't expecting you back until tomorrow, and you've brought company." His eyes took in Willa's ill-fitting men's clothes with curiosity but no judgment. "Frank, we need to talk," Jonah said, dismounting. He helped Willa down from her horse, his hands steadying her when her legs wobbled from hours of riding. Frank's expression turned serious. "Come on up to the house. Martha will want to hear this too." The main house was built from adobe with a wide porch and actual glass windows, a luxury Willa hadn't expected to see. Inside, it was surprisingly comfortable. Wooden floors, decent furniture, and the smell of something cooking. A woman appeared from what must be the kitchen, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. Martha Miller was probably in her late 30s, round with pregnancy, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She had the kind of face that was built for smiling, though right now her expression was one of concern as she took in her unexpected guests. "Jonah, what's happened?" she asked immediately. So Jonah told them the story, with Willa occasionally adding details. He didn't embellish or exaggerate, just laid out the facts. The arranged marriage, Dalton's failure to meet his intended bride before the wedding, Willa's understandable panic, and Jonah's decision to help her escape. Martha's expression grew progressively darker as the story unfolded. When Jonah finished, she crossed the room and took Willa's hands in her own. "That man ought to be ashamed of himself," Martha said firmly. "Trying to marry a woman he'd never even met, moving up the wedding without consulting her. And Montgomery Prescott is a snake, always has been. You did absolutely the right thing, running from that church." The kindness in her voice, the absolute certainty that Willa had made the correct choice, broke something loose inside. Fresh tears spilled down Willa's cheeks, but these were different from the panicked tears of the morning. These were relief. "I need work," Willa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm a hard worker. I can clean, cook, sew, help with children. I don't have anywhere else to go, and I need to earn money to get back on my feet. Jonah thought you might need help around the house." Martha looked at her husband, who nodded slightly. "We do need help," Martha said. "Lord knows I need help. Been running myself ragged trying to keep up with everything. But I need to know, do you have any experience with children? Because I've got 5 ranging from 2 to 12, and they can be quite a handful." "I helped raise my younger cousins before they moved away," Willa said. "And I worked as a companion to an elderly woman for 2 years. I'm patient and good at keeping things organized. When can you start?" Martha asked with a smile. The relief that washed through Willa was so intense she felt dizzy. "Really? You'll hire me?" "On a trial basis," Frank interjected, his voice kind but practical. "Let's say 2 weeks, see how it works out for everyone. We'll provide room and board plus wages. You'll help Martha with the house and children. If it's working well after 2 weeks, we'll make it permanent." "Fair, more than fair," Willa said, hardly able to believe her luck. Thank you so much." "Don't thank us yet," Martha said with a laugh. "Wait until you've met the children. But come on, let me show you where you'll sleep, and we'll find you some clothes that actually fit." The room Martha showed her was small but clean, with a real bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the eastern pastures. It was attached to the main house, but had its own entrance, offering privacy while keeping her close enough to help if Martha needed her during the night. "It's perfect," Willa said honestly. Martha produced a dress from her own wardrobe, something she'd worn before her current pregnancy. With a few quick adjustments, it fit Willa reasonably well. She also provided undergarments, a spare dress, and a warm shawl. "We'll get you properly outfitted in the next few days," Martha said, "but this should do for now." Dinner that evening was a revelation. The Miller family gathered around a large table in the kitchen. Frank and Martha, their 5 children ranging from 12-year-old Emma down to 2-year-old Samuel, plus Jonah and now Willa. The food was simple but plentiful, and the atmosphere was warm and chaotic in the way of families with young children. The children peppered Willa with questions, curious about the new arrival. She answered as honestly as she could without going into the full story of how she'd ended up at their ranch. Jonah helped deflect the more difficult questions, his easy manner with the children making Willa see yet another side of him. After dinner, while Martha put the younger children to bed, Willa helped Emma and the older boys clean up. Frank and Jonah stepped outside to talk, their voices low and serious. Through the window, Willa could see them standing in the fading light. Frank was gesturing as he spoke, and Jonah was nodding, his expression thoughtful. She wondered if they were talking about her, about the potential trouble her presence might bring to the ranch. "Don't worry about them," Emma said, following Willa's gaze. Pa's probably just getting the full story from Jonah. He likes to know exactly what's going on before he makes decisions. But if he said you could stay for a trial, he meant it. Pa doesn't go back on his word. "Your mother seems very kind," Willa ventured. "Ma's the best," Emma said with the absolute certainty of a loved child. "She works too hard, though. Having you here will help her a lot." The girl paused, studying Willa with eyes older than her years. "You really ran away from a wedding." "I did," Willa admitted. "That took guts," Emma said approvingly, sounding remarkably like Jonah. "Good for you." That night, lying in her small room with the window open to let in the cool night air, Willa reflected on the strangest day of her life. This morning she'd been standing in a church, shaking with terror, about to marry a stranger she knew she'd be miserable with. Tonight, she was lying in a comfortable bed in a house full of kind people, with actual employment and the beginning of a path forward. And it was all because of Jonah Baker, a cowboy who'd chosen to help a desperate stranger. Willa's last thought before sleep claimed her was of his gray-blue eyes and steady voice saying, "We'll take this one day at a time." The next morning, Willa woke to the sound of roosters and the bustle of a household coming to life. She dressed quickly in her borrowed clothes and found Martha already in the kitchen, starting breakfast. "You don't have to start working yet," Martha said when she saw Willa. "Give yourself a day to rest and settle in." "I'd rather stay busy," Willa admitted. "It'll help me stop thinking about everything." Martha understood. She put Willa to work helping with breakfast, and they fell into an easy rhythm. The kitchen was well organized, and Martha was the kind of cook who worked efficiently without fuss. As they cooked, Martha talked about the ranch, the children, and the rhythms of life out here. "It's not an easy life," Martha said honestly, "especially for women. The work is hard, the weather can be brutal, and we're isolated out here. The nearest town is Lordsburg, which you know, and beyond that it's a full day's ride to anything bigger. But it's a good life too. Frank is a good man, the children are healthy, and we're building something that will last." "How long have you been here?" Willa asked. 15 years. We started with nothing but a land claim and a lot of hope, built everything you see from scratch." Martha paused to flip pancakes on the griddle. "It wasn't always easy. We've had droughts, cattle disease, troubles with rustlers. But we made it work." When breakfast was ready, the family gathered again. Jonah arrived from the bunkhouse where he apparently stayed with the other ranch hands. His eyes found Willa immediately, a silent question in them. "Are you okay?" She nodded slightly, and his shoulders relaxed a fraction. After breakfast, Frank addressed the room. "Folks, I want to make something clear. Willa is part of this household now, working for us. If anyone comes around asking questions about her, you don't know anything. She's just hired help from up north. Everyone understand?" The children nodded seriously, even little Samuel, who probably didn't fully grasp what was happening. "Jonah," Frank continued, "I want you to ride into Lordsburg this afternoon, see what the situation is. Don't make trouble, just listen to what people are saying. Find out if Dalton is making threats or if he's moved on." "Will do," Jonah agreed. Willa's stomach clenched with anxiety, but she tried not to show it. The practical part of her knew they needed information, but the thought of Jonah going back to Lordsburg, potentially putting himself in danger on her behalf, made her deeply uncomfortable. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Willa helped Martha with washing, mending, and wrangling the younger children. The work was physical and constant, but it felt good to be useful. Martha was patient as she showed Willa where things were kept and how she liked things done. Around midday, Jonah prepared to leave for Lordsburg. Willa was hanging laundry in the yard when he came to say goodbye. "Try not to worry," he said quietly. "I'll be back by dark." "Please be careful," Willa said. "I couldn't stand it if something happened to you because of me." Jonah's expression softened. "I'll be careful." "And Willa, nothing that happens is because of you. It's because of the choices other people made, trying to force you into something you didn't want. Don't take on guilt that isn't yours to carry." He rode off before she could respond, leaving Willa staring after him with a confused tangle of feelings she didn't quite know how to name. The afternoon dragged endlessly. Willa tried to focus on her work, playing with the children, helping Martha prepare dinner, but her mind kept wandering to Lordsburg and what Jonah might be finding there. What if Dalton had him arrested? What if there was violence? Martha noticed her distraction but didn't comment, just gave her the simpler tasks and kept up a steady stream of conversation about neutral topics. As the sun began its descent, Willa found herself standing on the porch, watching the eastern path for any sign of a returning rider. Emma joined her after a few minutes. "He'll be fine," the girl said confidently. "Jonah's one of the smartest men I know. He won't take any stupid risks." "How long have you known him?" Willa asked. 3 years since he started working here. He's like part of the family now. Taught me to ride better, helped my brothers learn to rope. He's always been kind to us kids, not like some of the hands who think children are just nuisances." Emma paused, then added slyly, "He's never looked at anyone the way he looks at you, though." Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He barely knows me. He's just being kind to someone in trouble." "Maybe," Emma said, but she sounded unconvinced. "Or maybe he sees something worth knowing better." Before Willa could formulate a response, Emma pointed toward the path. "There, that's him." Relief flooded through Willa so intensely she felt weak. Jonah was indeed riding back, his posture relaxed and easy in the saddle. Whatever had happened in Lordsburg, he was safe and whole. Frank came out of the barn to meet him, and they talked for several minutes before both men walked up to the house. By then, Martha had joined them on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well?" Martha asked without preamble. Jonah removed his hat, his expression thoughtful. "It's interesting. Dalton's not making much noise about what happened. Near as I can tell, he's embarrassed and wants the whole thing to go away quietly. He's telling people that the bride backed out and returned east, that he's well rid of someone so flighty." "What about the law?" Frank asked. "Any talk of pressing charges?" "No. I stopped by the sheriff's office on a pretext and there's been no complaint filed. Sheriff doesn't even know the details, just that the wedding didn't happen." Jonah glanced at Willa. "You're in the clear legally." Willa sagged with relief. "Really?" "He's just letting it go, seems like it. Think about it from his perspective. What would he gain by pursuing you? He'd have to admit publicly that his bride ran away, that he was essentially trying to force a marriage with someone who didn't want him. That's not a good look for a man who considers himself important. Easier to pretend you had second thoughts and left town." "What about Prescott?" Martha asked. Jonah's expression hardened. "Prescott's telling a different story, making noise about breach of contract and money owed. But without Dalton backing him up, it's just talk. He has no legal standing and most people in town know he's a schemer anyway. Nobody's taking him seriously." "So it's over?" Willa asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I'm safe. For now," Frank said cautiously. "But I'd still stay away from Lordsburg for a good while. Let the whole thing die down completely. And Jonah's right about Dalton's pride. As long as we don't make noise about what really happened, he'll probably continue pretending you just went back east." That evening's dinner felt more celebratory, the tension that had underlaid the day finally releasing. The children were extra energetic, feeding off the improved mood of the adults. After the meal, Frank brought out a harmonica and played while Martha sang, her voice clear and sweet. The children begged Jonah for a song, and he obliged with a ballad about cowboys and cattle drives. Willa found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months, maybe years. The warmth of the family's acceptance, the safety of the ranch, the knowledge that she wasn't being pursued all combined to make her feel something close to peace. Later, after the children were in bed and Martha had retired for the night, Willa stepped outside for some air. The stars were impossibly bright, more than she'd ever seen in the city, scattered across the black sky in glittering profusion. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She turned to find Jonah had followed her outside. He stood a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands, looking up at the stars. "I've never seen anything like it," Willa admitted. "In Boston, you could barely see the stars through the factory smoke and city lights." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both looking at the sky. "Thank you," Willa said finally, "for everything. For helping me yesterday, for checking on the situation today, for bringing me here. You saved my life, Jonah. Maybe not literally, but you saved it from becoming something unbearable." "You would have found a way," Jonah said, but he looked pleased. "You're tougher than you know." "I didn't feel tough yesterday. I felt terrified." "Being scared and being tough aren't opposites," Jonah said. "Some of the bravest things people do, they do while being absolutely terrified. You were scared, but you still made the choice to run to save yourself. That's courage." Willa turned to look at him properly. In the moonlight, his face was all strong angles and shadows. There was something solid about him, something steady and real that called to something deep inside her. "Why did you really help me?" she asked quietly. "And don't say it's just because of what happened to your mother. That's part of it maybe, but there's more, isn't there?" Jonah was quiet for so long Willa thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "I was in town that morning to pick up supplies. Saw you get off the train 3 days earlier, saw the look on your face when Prescott met you. You looked like a trapped animal. And I thought, that's wrong. That's just wrong." He paused, turning his hat in his hands. "Then this morning I was riding past the church. Wasn't planning to stop, wasn't planning to interfere. But I saw you through the window, saw you shaking so hard you could barely stand, and I knew. I knew you were about to make a choice between being true to yourself and destroying yourself for the sake of obligation. And I thought, if she has the courage to run, I should have the courage to help her. And I did run," Willa said. "Right into me," Jonah said with a slight smile. "Seemed like fate at that point." They stood together in the comfortable darkness, and Willa felt something shift between them, something that went beyond gratitude or simple friendship. It was too new to name, too fragile to examine closely, but it was there nonetheless. "I should let you get some rest," Jonah said eventually. "Martha will have you working hard tomorrow." "Jonah," Willa said as he turned to go, "will I see you? Or do you mostly work out on the range?" "I'll be around," he said, and there was something warm in his voice that made Willa's heart beat faster. "Frank's got me working on breaking a new string of horses for the next few weeks. I'll be in the corrals most days." After he left, Willa stood outside a few minutes longer, her mind swirling with thoughts and feelings she didn't quite know how to process. 2 days ago, she'd been preparing for a loveless marriage to a stranger. Now she was free, employed, safe, and developing feelings for a cowboy who'd risked trouble to help her. Life could change so quickly, she realized. One choice, one moment of courage, and everything could transform. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and adjustment. Willa threw herself into helping Martha, learning the rhythms of ranch life. She woke early to help with breakfast, spent her days managing children, cleaning, cooking, mending, and doing the 1,000 small tasks that kept a household running. The work was harder than anything she'd done in Boston, but it was also more satisfying. She could see the direct results of her efforts in clean rooms, fed children, and Martha's grateful smiles. True to his word, Jonah was around often. Willa would look out the kitchen window and see him in the corrals, working with horses. He had a gift for it, she realized. She watched him spend hours with a skittish mare, never forcing, never angry, just patiently working until the horse learned to trust him. Sometimes he'd stop by the house for water or a meal, and they'd talk. Short conversations at first, both of them feeling their way carefully. But gradually, the conversations grew longer, more personal. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his father to a horse accident when Jonah was 18, about coming west to start fresh. She told him about her childhood in Boston, about her mother's death, and her father's descent into debt and despair after losing his wife. They discovered shared interests. Both loved to read, though books were precious commodities out here. Both had a dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments. Both had known loss and loneliness, and both were trying to build something better from difficult circumstances. Emma noticed, of course. The perceptive 12-year-old missed nothing. "Jonah's sweet on you," she announced one afternoon while she and Willa were shelling peas. "Emma," Willa felt her cheeks heat. "It's true. And you're sweet on him too. I can tell by the way you watch him when you think nobody's looking." "That's not appropriate conversation," Willa said, trying to sound stern and failing. "Why not? You're both grown-ups. You're both unmarried, and you'd be good together. Jonah needs someone who's smart and brave, and you need someone who's kind and steady. Seems perfect to me." Martha, overhearing from across the kitchen, laughed. "Leave the poor woman alone, Emma. These things develop in their own time." But Emma's words stuck in Willa's mind. Was it so obvious? Did everyone see this growing connection between her and Jonah? And if so, what was she supposed to do about it? At the end of 2 weeks, Frank and Martha officially offered Willa permanent employment. The trial period had gone even better than expected. Martha was visibly more rested with help. The children had taken to Willa completely, and the household ran more smoothly than it had in months. "You've been a godsend," Martha said warmly. "I don't know how we managed before you got here." "I'm the one who's grateful," Willa said honestly. "You gave me a chance when I desperately needed one." That evening, Frank organized a small celebration. He brought out bottles of beer for the adults and made a special trip to produce store-bought candy for the children, a rare treat. The ranch hands joined them for dinner, and the atmosphere was festive. Jonah sat next to Willa during the meal, and she was acutely aware of his presence. Their arms brushed occasionally, sending little sparks of awareness through her. When he smiled at something she said, she felt warm all over. After dinner, people drifted outside to enjoy the cooling evening air. The ranch hands started a small fire, and someone produced a guitar. Music and conversation filled the night. Willa found herself sitting slightly apart from the group, watching the easy camaraderie with a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in years. She belonged here. It was a strange realization, given that she'd arrived barely 2 weeks ago, but it was true nonetheless. This place, these people, had become home. "Mind if I join you?" She looked up to find Jonah standing there, 2 tin cups in his hands. He offered her one and she accepted, finding it filled with cool water. "Thank you," she said, making room for him on the bench. They sat quietly for a moment, watching the others around the fire. Then Jonah said, "Can I ask you something, of course? Do you have any regrets? About running, about coming here, about how everything turned out?" Willa considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "I was terrified in that church, but it was the most honest fear I've ever felt. My body was screaming at me that marrying Dalton was wrong, and I finally listened to it. Everything that's happened since has been better than I could have hoped for." "Good," Jonah said quietly. "I'm glad." "What about you?" Willa asked. "Any regrets about helping a desperate stranger?" Jonah turned to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "None whatsoever. Helping you was the best decision I've made in a long time." "Why?" Willa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because," Jonah said slowly, "somewhere between the church and here, between helping a stranger and getting to know you, I started to care about you. More than I probably should, given that we've only known each other 2 weeks." Willa's heart was pounding. 2 weeks can be a long time when you're living through them one day at a time. "Is that so?" There was a hint of a smile in Jonah's voice. "That's what someone wise once told me," Willa said. "This man who helped me escape an impossible situation, and then told me we'd take things one day at a time. Turns out he was right. Each day built on the one before, and now here we are." "And where exactly are we?" Jonah asked. It was a loaded question, and Willa knew it. She could deflect, could pretend not to understand, could protect herself by keeping things ambiguous. Or she could be honest, could have the same courage now that she'd had running from that church. "I think," she said carefully, "we're at the beginning of something, if you want to be." Jonah's smile was like sunrise breaking over the desert. "I want to be, very much. But I need you to know I'm not a rich man. I work for wages, I own a horse and a saddle and not much else. I can't offer you an easy life." "I don't want an easy life," Willa said. "I want an honest one with someone who sees me as a person rather than a convenience. I want to build something real, even if it's hard. Especially if it's hard, because then it'll be something we created together." "Willa Foster," Jonah said softly, "would you let me court you properly? I know we've done everything backward, but I'd like to do this part right." "I'd like that very much," Willa said, and felt happiness bloom in her chest like a flower opening to sunlight. Jonah reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, warm and strong. They sat together like that, hands joined, watching the fire and the stars, and Willa thought about how much could change in 2 weeks. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Willa had experienced. Not that she had much basis for comparison. Her only previous suitor had been a clerk in Boston who'd lost interest when he learned about her father's debts. But she instinctively knew that what was developing between her and Jonah was special. They were both busy with work, but they found time for each other in small moments. Jonah would stop by the house midday and they'd share lunch, talking about everything and nothing. In the evenings, after the children were in bed and the day's work was done, they'd walk together, exploring the land around the ranch. He taught her about the desert, pointing out plants and animals, teaching her which tracks belonged to which creatures. She taught him bits of poetry she'd memorized, reciting verses while they watched the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Frank and Martha watched the developing relationship with approval. Martha was particularly pleased, often manufacturing excuses for Willa to take Jonah food or messages, creating opportunities for them to spend time together. "You're matchmaking," Willa accused her one afternoon, but she was smiling. "Absolutely," Martha said without shame. "You're both good people who deserve happiness. Why shouldn't I help that along?" The children were delighted by the courtship. Emma took full credit for predicting it, while the younger ones simply enjoyed the romantic drama of it all. Even 2-year-old Samuel seemed to sense something special was happening, toddling after Jonah whenever he visited and demanding to be picked up. One Sunday, about 6 weeks after Willa's arrival at the ranch, Jonah asked if she'd like to go riding with him. Martha quickly agreed to watch after the children for the afternoon, practically shooing them out the door. Jonah had saddled a gentle mare for Willa, and they rode out across the range at an easy pace. He led her to a spot he'd mentioned before, a small canyon with a spring where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the sound of running water was a constant peaceful murmur. They dismounted and sat on smooth rocks by the water, and for a while they simply enjoyed the peace of the place. Then Jonah said, "I need to tell you something." His serious tone made Willa's stomach clench with worry. "What is it?" "It's nothing bad," Jonah assured her quickly. "At least, I don't think it is. But we've been stepping around this for weeks now, and I think it's time to be direct." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Willa, I'm in love with you. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a short time, but it's true. I love your courage and your kindness. I love how hard you work and how good you are with the children. I love talking to you and being near you and just knowing you exist in the world." Willa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she said. "I think I started loving you the moment you told me we'd take things one day at a time. You gave me hope when I had none, and you've given me so much more since then." Jonah reached up to cup her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "I want to marry you, Willa. I want to build a life with you. But I'm not going to propose yet because I don't want you to think you have to say yes. You've only been free of that other situation for 6 weeks. I don't want you to feel pressured or rushed. I want you to have time to be sure." "What if I'm already sure?" Willa asked. "Then we'll wait anyway," Jonah said with a gentle smile. "Because we're taking this one day at a time, remember. And I want every day we have together to be a conscious choice, not something either of us feels forced into." He leaned forward slowly and kissed her, soft and sweet, a promise of more to come. Willa kissed him back, feeling safe and cherished and chosen in a way she'd never experienced before. The summer passed in a haze of work and love and growing confidence. Willa became indispensable to the Miller household, and more than that, she became a true part of the family. When Martha's baby was born in July, a healthy boy they named Thomas, Willa was right there helping, and Martha trusted her to care for the newborn as much as she trusted Frank. Jonah continued working with the horses, and Willa loved watching him work. He was skilled and patient, turning wild or skittish animals into steady, reliable mounts. Frank recognized his talent and gave him increasing responsibility, effectively making him the ranch's head wrangler. In August, Jonah took Willa into a different town, a full day's ride from Lordsburg, where they wouldn't risk running into anyone from Willa's aborted wedding. They spent the day browsing the general store, eating lunch at a restaurant, and simply enjoying being together away from the ranch. It felt normal and domestic and wonderful. As they rode back, the sun setting behind them, Willa felt a certainty settle over her. This was her life now. This man, this land, this family she'd found. And she wanted it, all of it, forever. September brought cooler weather and the annual cattle drive, where much of the ranch's herd was moved to market. Jonah went with the other hands, and Willa found that she missed him terribly during the 3 weeks he was gone. She'd grown so accustomed to his presence, to their daily conversations and evening walks, that his absence felt like a missing limb. When the men returned, sun darkened and trail weary, Willa was waiting on the porch. Jonah's face lit up when he saw her, and he dismounted almost before his horse had stopped moving, striding over to sweep her into a hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "I missed you," he said into her hair. "I missed you too," Willa said, holding tight. "Don't leave for that long again." "I'll do my best not to," Jonah promised. That evening, after everyone had eaten and the excitement of the returning cattle drive had died down, Jonah asked Willa to walk with him. They headed to their favorite spot, a small rise that overlooked the ranch buildings and offered a view of the surrounding land. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage. Jonah held Willa's hand as they walked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. When they reached the top of the rise, Jonah stopped and turned to face her. He looked nervous, Willa realized with surprise. This confident, capable man who handled wild horses without fear looked genuinely anxious. "Willa," he began, then stopped and took a deep breath. "I said I wouldn't rush this, and I've tried not to. It's been almost 5 months since that day at the church. 5 months of getting to know you, falling deeper in love with you every single day, and I can't wait any more." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hand, and looked up at her with such love in his eyes that Willa felt her breath catch. "I don't have a fancy ring yet, though I'm planning to fix that, and I'm not a wealthy man who can offer you a grand house or fancy things. But I can offer you myself, all of me, for the rest of my life. I promise to love you, to respect you, to make you laugh, and to take every day one at a time with you. Willa Foster, will you marry me?" "Yes," Willa said immediately, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, absolutely yes." Jonah stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her head spin. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Willa said, "But not too quickly. I want to do this right too. I want time to plan, to prepare, to be excited about my wedding instead of terrified." "Anything you want," Jonah said. "We could wait a year if you wanted." "Not that long," Willa said with a laugh. "But maybe a few months. Spring wedding." "Spring sounds perfect," Jonah agreed. They told Frank and Martha that evening, and the household erupted in celebration. The children were thrilled, Emma especially taking credit once again for predicting this outcome. Martha cried happy tears and hugged them both. Frank shook Jonah's hand firmly and told Willa she was getting a good man. "I know," Willa said, smiling at her fiancé. "The best man." The engagement period was joyful and busy. Jonah worked extra hours and saved every penny to buy Willa a simple gold ring with a small diamond, which he presented to her on her birthday in October. Willa cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by the sacrifice it represented. They made plans for the wedding and their future. Frank offered to help them homestead on a piece of land adjacent to the ranch, giving them a foundation to build on. Jonah would continue working at the ranch, and Willa would still help Martha part-time while building their own home and life. Winter came and went, cold and sometimes harsh but beautiful in its starkness. Willa learned to love the desert in all its moods and seasons. She learned to ride better, to shoot a rifle for protection and hunting, to navigate by landmarks and stars. She became a woman of the West in ways she never could have imagined during her years in Boston. Through it all, Jonah was beside her, patient and steady and unfailingly kind. They had disagreements occasionally, as any couple does, but they talked through them. Jonah never raised his voice in anger, never used his greater physical strength to intimidate, never tried to control or diminish her. He treated her as an equal partner in all things, asking her opinions and respecting her decisions. As spring approached and the wedding date neared, Willa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she'd been alone and frightened in Boston, facing an arranged marriage that terrified her. 6 months ago, she'd stood in a church shaking so hard she could barely stand, about to make the worst mistake of her life. And now she was about to marry a man she loved deeply, a man who loved and respected her in return. She was surrounded by a family who cared for her, doing work she found meaningful, living in a place that felt like home. All because she'd had the courage to run, and because a cowboy had had the kindness to help her. The wedding was planned for late April, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers and the weather was perfect. Unlike the aborted wedding in Lordsburg, this one would be small and intimate, just family and close friends. Senora Martinez traveled up from Lordsburg to make Willa's dress, a beautiful creation of cream-colored fabric with delicate embroidery. Martha helped with flowers and food. Frank arranged for a circuit preacher to come perform the ceremony. The children were beside themselves with excitement, particularly Emma, who appointed herself Willa's honorary maid of honor. The night before the wedding, Martha insisted that Jonah stay in the bunkhouse while Willa remained in the main house, observing tradition that the couple shouldn't see each other before the ceremony. Willa lay in her small room, too excited to sleep, thinking about how different she felt compared to the last time she'd been a bride-to-be. Then, she'd been terrified, trapped, shaking with fear and dread. Now she felt peaceful and excited and certain. There was no doubt in her mind, no fear, just happy anticipation of marrying the man she loved. The morning dawned clear and beautiful, the sky a perfect blue. Martha and Emma helped Willa dress, fussing over every detail. The dress fit perfectly, and when Willa looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the confident woman looking back. She'd changed so much in a year. "You look beautiful," Martha said, her eyes shining with tears. "Absolutely beautiful." "Jonah's going to cry when he sees you," Emma predicted with satisfaction. The ceremony was held outside, under a cottonwood tree near the house. Chairs had been set up for guests, and wildflowers decorated everything. The ranch hands had cleaned up and dressed in their best clothes. Even the children were scrubbed and tidy, though Willa suspected that wouldn't last long. When it was time, Frank offered Willa his arm to walk her down the makeshift aisle. "You're like a daughter to us," he said quietly. "Martha and I couldn't be happier for you and Jonah." "Thank you," Willa said, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything, for taking me in, for giving me a chance, for making me part of your family." "Thank you for being the kind of person worth taking a chance on," Frank replied. Then they were walking, and Willa could see Jonah waiting under the tree. He wore new clothes purchased specially for the occasion, his hair neatly combed, his expression one of awe and love as he watched her approach. Emma had been right. He was crying, tears streaming down his face without any apparent shame. When Willa reached him and Frank placed her hand in Jonah's, she was crying too. The preacher began the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment, about building a life together, about the sacred bonds of marriage. Willa heard the words distantly, too focused on Jonah's face, on his hands holding hers so gently, on the profound rightness of this moment. When it came time for vows, Jonah spoke first, his voice steady despite the tears. "Willa, 6 months ago you were shaking before a wedding, terrified and trapped. I told you then that we'd take things one day at a time, and I'm making you that same promise now. Every day for the rest of our lives, I choose you. I choose to love you, to honor you, to stand beside you in joy and hardship. You're the bravest person I know, and I'm grateful every day that you ran into my arms that morning." Willa took a shaky breath, then spoke her own vows. "Jonah, you saved my life in every way that matters. You gave me hope when I had none, safety when I was in danger, and love when I thought I'd never find it. You taught me that being scared and being brave can exist together, and that taking things one day at a time is the only way to build a life worth living. I promise to choose you every day, to love you through everything, to be your partner in all things. I'm not scared anymore because I know that whatever comes, we'll face it together." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Jonah kissed her to enthusiastic applause and cheering from their small audience. When they broke apart, both grinning through tears, Willa felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. This was what marriage was supposed to be. A choice made freely, a commitment between equals, a partnership built on love and respect. This was what she'd been running toward when she fled that church 6 months ago, even if she hadn't known it at the time. The celebration afterward was joyful and chaotic. Martha had prepared a feast, and everyone ate and talked and laughed. The children ran wild, their earlier tidiness forgotten. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing as the afternoon wore into evening. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Jonah and Willa slipped away from the party. They walked hand in hand to the small house that had been built for them over the winter months. It was modest, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Inside, Jonah lit a lamp and warm light filled the space. They'd moved Willa's few possessions in earlier, and some wedding gifts were stacked in the corner, but otherwise the house was empty, waiting to be filled with their life together. "How do you feel, Mrs. Baker?" Jonah asked, pulling Willa close. "Happy," Willa said simply. "Completely, perfectly happy, and not even a little bit scared." "Good," Jonah said, kissing her forehead, "because we've got a whole lifetime of days ahead of us, and I plan to make every single one of them good." They stood together in their new home, holding each other as darkness fell outside, and their new life together truly began. Willa thought about the telegram that had arrived over a year ago, about the terror she'd felt, about standing in that church shaking so violently she thought she might fall apart. She thought about Jonah saying, "We'll take this one day at a time," and how those words had become the foundation of everything good in her life. And she thought about how sometimes the worst moments could lead to the best outcomes, how running away could actually mean running toward something better, how courage and fear were not opposites, but companions. In Jonah's arms, in their home on their wedding night, Willa felt nothing but gratitude for every choice that had led her here, and excitement for all the days to come. The years that followed were full and rich, not always easy but always good. Jonah and Willa built their life together one day at a time, just as he'd promised. They worked hard, expanding their land and building a small herd of cattle. Jonah's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and people came from increasingly far away to have him work with their difficult animals. Willa continued to help Martha part-time, the 2 women becoming best friends in addition to being like sisters. She learned to manage their household with efficiency, to handle the unpredictable challenges of ranch life, to find joy in the simple pleasures of home and hard work. 18 months after their wedding, Willa gave birth to their first child, a boy they named Thomas James Baker, after Martha's youngest and Jonah's middle name. Jonah cried when he held his son for the first time, this strong cowboy reduced to tears by the tiny person in his arms. "He's perfect," Jonah whispered. "You're perfect. I can't believe how lucky I am." "We're lucky," Willa corrected, exhausted but happy. "We're lucky together." 2 years later, a daughter arrived, Charlotte Rose, with her father's gray-blue eyes and her mother's determined chin. She was followed 18 months later by another boy, Samuel Robert, named after Martha's youngest, who had become Thomas's best playmate. The house expanded as the family grew, rooms added on as needed. Frank helped with the construction, and the bond between the 2 families remained strong. The children grew up together, and Emma, now grown and married herself, remained close to Willa, their friendship forged that first week carrying through the years. Willa sometimes thought about her life in Boston, about the woman she'd been. It seemed like a different person, someone smaller and more fearful. She thought about the telegram announcing her arranged marriage, about standing in that church shaking with terror, about running into Jonah's arms. She'd been so frightened that day, so certain her life was over. Instead, it had been beginning. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jonah and Willa stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 9 now, tall for his age and already showing Jonah's gift with horses. Charlotte was 7, bright and fearless, always organizing her brothers into elaborate games. Samuel was 5, sweet-natured and thoughtful, more interested in books than horses to Jonah's amused bewilderment. "You remember what you said to me the night we got engaged?" Willa asked, leaning against Jonah's side. "I said a lot of things that night," Jonah replied, wrapping an arm around her waist. "You said we'd take every day one at a time," Willa reminded him. "And that's what we've done. 10 years taken one day at a time, and look what we've built." "It's been the best 10 years of my life," Jonah said. "Even the hard days, the scary days, the days when nothing went right, all of them were good because I got to live them with you." "I love you," Willa said, turning to kiss him. "Thank you for helping a terrified woman who ran out of a church." "Thank you for being brave enough to run," Jonah replied, "and brave enough to trust me to help you." As the sun set over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in the brilliant colors they'd watched together for 10 years, Willa Foster Baker felt nothing but contentment. Her life hadn't been easy, but it had been real and honest and full of love. She'd been shaking before that wedding in Lordsburg, terrified of a future she couldn't control. Jonah had told her they'd take things one day at a time, and that simple wisdom had become the foundation of the best life she could have imagined. One day at a time, they'd built a marriage. One day at a time, they'd created a family. One day at a time, they'd turned a terrifying ending into a beautiful beginning. And one day at a time, they would continue building their life together, for all the days to come. The children grew older, and Willa and Jonah grew older with them. Their son Thomas eventually took over much of the horse training, working alongside his father with the same patience and skill. Charlotte surprised everyone by developing an interest in cattle ranching, becoming as tough and capable as any cowboy. Young Samuel, true to his nature, became a teacher, opening a small school that served the scattered ranches in the area. Frank and Martha eventually retired, turning the Running Creek Ranch over to their eldest son, but remaining in a small house on the property. Martha and Willa remained close friends until Martha's death at age 72, and Willa grieved as deeply as if she'd lost her own mother. Through the decades, through joys and sorrows, through the changes that time inevitably brought, Jonah and Willa remained devoted to each other. They'd learned early that love wasn't just a feeling but a choice, one they made every single day. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, they renewed their vows in a simple ceremony under the same cottonwood tree where they'd been married half a century before. They were both in their 70s now, silver-haired and weathered, but their eyes still lit up when they looked at each other. 50 years, Jonah said that evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset. Taken one day at a time, just like I promised. Best 50 years anyone could ask for, Willa said, her hand in his. Though I still think about that day sometimes. The day I was shaking before the wedding. Which wedding? Jonah teased. Today's or the first one, the one that never happened, Willa clarified. I think about how terrified I was, how trapped I felt, and then I think about you saying we'd take things one day at a time and how that became everything. You would have been fine without me, Jonah said. You would have found a way. Maybe, Willa allowed. But I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I'm glad you were there. I'm glad for every day we've had together. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they'd done for 50 years, watching the sun paint the New Mexico sky in colors that never got old. Their life together had been exactly what they'd promised each other. honest, real, built one day at a time into something beautiful and lasting. And as the stars began to emerge overhead, brilliant against the darkening sky, Willa Foster Baker felt nothing but gratitude. For courage she'd found when she needed it most, for a cowboy who'd helped a desperate stranger, for a life built on love and trust and the simple wisdom of taking things one day at a time. It had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything.